I am here with Bob Daugherty, who is the Executive Dean of the Forbes School of Business and Technology. His research area of interest include leadership, economics, and investment decision making. Previously, he served as the CEO of the Jack Welch Management Institute and holds degrees from Harvard, Columbia, and the University of Cambridge. He serves on multiple companies' boards and charitable foundations. Also here is Dr. Wendy Borlabi, who is a performance coach for the Chicago Bulls and founder of the Borlabi Consulting, a performance psychology firm. She has done extensive work with the United States Olympic Committee and co-founded Acumen Performance Group, along with 6 current and ex-Navy SEALs. Together, Bob and Wendy conduct research regarding personal mastery and decision-making that provides insight regarding how lessons in sports are applicable to business and vice versa. Welcome, Bob and Wendy.
Thank you, Diane. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Absolutely. We're so excited to be here.
Oh, well, this is going to be fun. We've been talking about doing this, and I'm really curious about your research because I think I'm going to start with Bob on this one, just because it's hard to go back and forth when there's 2 people. So I'm curious, Bob, who are you researching? What are you going to do with this data? I just kind of like to have some background on how you guys started to work together and just some foundation for all this.
Yeah, you bet. So I've spent a lot of time working with successful leaders of actually, Fortune 500 companies, but also entrepreneurs and CEOs of tech companies in Silicon Valley. And we are always trying to find what makes a leader more successful and how he's able to convince an organization and share a vision and provide, the resources for the teams to execute. And as I got to know Wendy over the last half a dozen years or so, it became very clear that the work that she does with athletes and coaches in professional sports and with the Olympics is that there's a lot of common ground in terms of the methodologies and the thinking that goes into high performance. And so we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of years looking at different organizations and different people to find those common traits that lead to success.
Well, this is interesting because you and I have worked together, and I know you pretty well, and I've heard that you are quite the basketball fan, so I could see why you and Wendy would be a good match for this. I heard you're good at basketball, by the way. One of your friends told me that. I can't remember who a while ago.
I was average a long time ago.
Oh, okay. Well, that's fascinating because my brother played basketball at ASU, and I'm interested in what you do, Wendy, because I've watched some of your talks, including the Coach Forum where you discuss the importance of self-awareness, and I'm fascinated with how you deal with that because self-awareness is a huge part of emotional intelligence, and I wrote my doctoral dissertation on emotional intelligence and its relationship to sales performance. So I'm curious, how is personal mastery and self-awareness tied into sports performance?
Well, I think that they're one and the same. I think that if you're, as an athlete, one of the things that, you want them to be able to do is to be able to say or know what it is that they do really well, mm-hmm. and then be able to execute that. And so when you're looking on the side of self-awareness and personal mastery, so you're looking at if we were to take, I'm going to take a sport, basketball, just because we were just talking about it.
Okay.
So if you know that you've got a really good jump shot and you know that your set shot is really not that good, or maybe you know that, driving to the lane on the left side is not that good, you want to focus on the things that you are not that great at, but you want to accentuate the things that you do really well that you don't have to think about. So if you've learned through performance, through coaches, or through even just the what we call the reinforcement of making the basket, mm-hmm. that your jump shot is really well, that becomes one of those nuggets that you put into your personal mastery piece, right? Or that, should I say, self-awareness box. Mm-hmm. You put it in that box, and then you start to want to accentuate the other pieces that you can also add back into the personal mastery pieces, because when they become something that you master, then you're not actually thinking about it. You get into what, you hear all the time people talk about someone was playing in the zone or in the flow. Right. You get to where those aspects of your game become into where you're not thinking about it. You're not having actually concentrating on it. You're just performing it. And that's what you want to be able to do when you're on the court or on the field. And I didn't venture to say even in the boardroom, you want to be able to not actually have to stop and concentrate on little aspects of what's going on with your team. You want to just be able to focus on what you do really well and what your team does really well, and then bring all those things to the forefront and then be able to execute it.
So you're saying that, confidence really has an impact on your decision making then?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, I think it's really important to look at that, because I think that a lot of people kind of get nervous of their decision-making ability. I've had people on my show, Lolly Daskell, for example, who interviews a lot of leaders, and a lot of leaders feel like they're going to be found out, that they don't know as much as people think they know. Do you find that's the case with this, Wendy?
Absolutely. I laugh because I think that that's one of those things that, it actually makes you look better to know what your limitations are, as opposed to looking worse. I think that when you can say this is something that you do really well and this is something that you need help at, people flock to that, right? They want to be a part of those. They want to be a part of that piece. And so it's just funny to hear that, it's a negative, when it's actually, I think in my world, it's actually a positive, because then people flock to that. And so, and I think the decision-making piece, I think it's one of those things that when you look at a whole, when you make decisions, I think oftentimes we look at the outcome as to decide whether if it was a good decision or not, as opposed to the process, right?
Right.
And I think you get stuck in that, because it's not necessarily the outcome that makes it a good decision. The process, I believe, is what makes it a good decision.
Well, that's interesting. And Bob, you've made obviously some really good decisions. Going to Harvard, Columbia, and Cambridge might fall into that category. What does it take to make good decisions?
Well, it's interesting. Before we jump into that, I just want to share two perspectives on what you and Wendy were just talking about.
Yeah, please.
And I can't agree more with what Wendy just said, which is, a lot of people look at success and failure and, why did I fail? And they look at the outcome and not the process to get there, actually. And I've learned that failure is by and large due to not accepting or successfully dealing with the realities of life. And that achieving success is simply just a matter of accepting your realities. And, there's some truth and some reality can be scary. For example, you get a deadly disease, but, knowing them allows us to deal with them better, and being truthful and letting others be completely truthful allows us to explore, our own thoughts and expose feedback to each other. That's essential for learning. And, if you really drill into the process of how people find out what they're successful at, like Wendy was saying, just find out what you're good at and keep doing that. It's oftentimes by a trial and error, but, the number of great people that I've had the good fortune to meet were not born great. They all made a lot of mistakes and had a lot of weaknesses. But they all, looked at those very candidly and with a lot of clear reality. So,
well, it is challenging though to look at ourselves. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of mistakes that leaders make because they just don't know what they don't know. And how do we get that perception?
Yeah, that's age and wisdom, right?
Right.
But it's all about self-reflection. It's, what they in the military call after action reviews. And certainly in sports, that's one thing I really admire about professional sports is, they'll have a game and then they will actually study that game, which may have lasted 2 hours of elapsed time, but they'll spend the next 4 to 5 days working with coaches, assistant coaches, the team, and figuring out what did we do right, what did we do wrong, what can we do better in the future.
Right. So they involve them, I guess, in the decisions, the team. I mean, is that a big factor, involving the team members?
I think so. What do you think, Wendy?
Absolutely. I think if it's just one person's point of view, then I think you're losing so many other perspectives.
Yeah. I agree. I mean, I think it's really interesting because, we'll go back to you, Wendy, because we're talking about some of decisions and decision making, and there's a lot of subjectivity, whether something's a good decision or not. How can a decision be judged as good or bad? How do you do that?
Again, going back to looking at the process, when I think about, and just even working with athletes, I try not to focus on the outcome, and I try to help them not focus on the outcome. So if we're going to just look at, if we're looking at basketball, if you're looking at changing or increasing your free throw percentage, the outcome obviously is to make the basket. And we're working on that process and making those changes, decisions, if you will. We're not looking at making the changes so that way you can make the basket. I know it sounds kind of funny, but that's not what we're thinking about.
Right.
we're making the changes that fit who you are and your perspective and how you fit, how you want to work, your mindset. We're making those adjustments, and how you view things in order to change your process to shoot the basket. Because once you get that process down and it fits and it's locked in, and again, it becomes part of that piece of your brain where you're not thinking about it, then you get the outcome that you want. And so when I'm thinking about decisions, it's in that same realm, is that I want you to focus on the process, the pieces that get you into that outcome that you want. Not thinking that the outcome is going to determine whether it was a good decision or not, but thinking about how you can make those changes and adjustments. That way you can get to the outcome that you would like, and knowing that the outcome will come.
Right.
It will come, but you got to focus on how those pieces fit with who you are and the team and the decisions and who your teammates are and who's going to be on the court or the field with you at the time. All those things come into play, and those decisions and being able to shift. I think it's one of the also important things of decision making is that just because you make a decision doesn't mean it needs to be the as they say, the end all be all. You can change it, and you can adjust. Right. And I think that's what good leaders do, is that you adjust. Maybe you know what you're going to do, but then something else will come into play and you're able to adjust, knowing yourself and knowing your team. You make those adjustments along the way. And then again, it gets you to the outcome that you want. But if you get stuck on only being able to, okay, this is the plan we're going to go, and then something happens, and if you can't adjust to it, then you get, I think you get into those problems. And I think, Bob, I think you can see that in the business world as well, I would suggest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Diane, you said something earlier about the importance of confidence. And, what Wendy was just saying was trust the process.
Right.
And trust your teammates. And, the great leaders that, I've studied and got to know really actually focus on confidence, and they want to instill it in the people around them. And so it's not only confidence in the individual, and you got to be careful there because, you don't want self-confidence to lead to hubris and big egos and too much pride. But you want them to have confidence in the process. And so if you look at the great companies, their ability to innovate, they trust the process that their engineering team and their sales and marketing teams will work together to satisfy, market needs. And certainly the same thing goes with the great athletes and great sports teams.
Well, it's interesting because I know you worked with Jack Welch, and I'm sure you saw a lot of great decision making and pivoting and trusting the process. What did you learn from working there that's impacted how you make decisions now?
I guess I could talk for several hours. I think, Jack was voted manager of the century by, I guess, Fortune magazine last year. And a century is 100 years, and there were a lot of businesses last century. But the two things, especially as it relates to this topic, one is not muzzling voices, and that's so important for a leader to get everybody's input. No single person, no matter how smart they are in a business, even if you're the top guy, knows everything. And so you need to create a culture and an environment where people feel confident and are able to share their ideas. And the leader may not always agree with those ideas, but you got to, certainly be open to them. And then the second thing is just be real. Don't act phony. It's amazing the number of leaders that spend time creating personas and put up a wall between themselves and their employees. And, even where they sit in an organization on top of a building or closed off are things that are two things that Jack would, say that leads to underperformance. And, I completely agree with him.
Well, I agree with you. And, having worked for you, I can say that I was confident to share ideas with you. You're very open to that. I definitely didn't hold back.
Yours, Diane.
Yes, I'm sure you did. But I think it's really important, though, to continue with what you said. How do you know when you've made a bad decision, though, Bob? I mean, how does that come through?
Well, and this is, and I would love to get Wendy's intake on this as well. I think there's two results of any goal or objective, and so you make a series of decisions to say to win the NBA championship, or you make a series of decisions to be the number one provider in your market, and you at some point actually might run into a competitor that has better resources for whatever reason. They beat you in the market, or they beat you in a game. And so there's that absolute result of, hey, did the company make money this year? Did the company gain market share or lose market share? But then the second, and so that, I think those are very clearly defined. The second, though, which is I think even more important, because it leads to long-term success and it gives you the ability to compete again and be successful the next time you face that competitor, which is being very clear about the values that support your process. And did our employees follow and live the values? And did we trust the process, trust the system to achieve the result? And I think that those are the two big categories that you really need to look at. And so, I think there's a moment in time, certainly in a sporting event, or for that matter in a business, did we achieve the outcome or not? But then, more importantly, and that's the role of the leader and the individual, is each and every day when you hit the court or you hit the office, are you doing what you expect needs to be done to be successful?
Well, you guys, what you're looking at is just, correlations with the business world and sports and all that. And I want to bring it back to Wendy, just to the sporting aspect. And what are some of the mistakes leaders make that prevent a team from winning championships?
That's a big question. So,
well, I know it's something that it's just something that I think we could look at to look at in the business sense and the sports sense, and it's challenging, isn't it?
It is. I agree. It is. I think it's one of those. There's so many moving pieces, and I think coming from a sports perspective, obviously, I think one of the big things is, in my opinion, it's not looking at the whole team. So not looking at, I think, in my experience, especially when I was with the Olympics, one of the things that happened is that the teams would look at maybe the players that they have and want to bring in a coach that didn't fit the players that they have, or have a coach that wanted to change the whole dynamic of the team, but had these players that didn't fit that dynamic. And so there was that came into play. The team may have been a great team, and I saw that very, very often, especially in the Olympics, that we've had lots of great teams, but coaches came in with a different perspective, but didn't coach to the team. So you have to know who you're coaching to. So I think that comes into play about, maybe diverting. I'm going to use the word diverting the championship, or delaying it, should I say. And also think one of the things that people oftentimes aren't patient with the process, as Bob was saying. We're not patient with the process for leaders. I think it takes time for leadership to come in and develop reverence. And I think oftentimes in sports, we feel like that time is like 5 months. You bring in somebody and they should be able to develop that reverence in their players in that 5 months time. And when there hasn't been a shift, then we've, fired that coach and moved on to somebody else.
Right.
But that we don't allow those pieces to develop, because if you think about it, we're still human, right? Although they're players, they're still human. And so there's still that emotional piece that needs to happen with their coaches and with their leaders. And so if we don't allow those pieces to develop, I think that's where you have that delay in the championship, or divert the championship, should I say. So I think those are some of the things that happens with leaders, is that you're not looking at the whole team. Maybe you're not coaching to the players that you have, and then you're not allowing the coach to have the time to develop that reverence, develop those, that trust, to where the team will do whatever it takes to to be successful or to win games, you know. And I think in the experiences that I've had with sports, again, I've seen it and I go back to Olympics because it's one of those, it happens every 4 years, right? And so, especially with we're looking so quickly how we can turn that over. So in the course of 4 years, I've been with teams that have had 3 coaches.
Wow.
Exactly. 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 So how are we actually gonna win a championship when the players don't even know actually who they're playing for, you know, or what even the new game plan yet? And so, you know, we need to have that patience, be able to let the leaders be able to foster that reverence. I think that's just really important.
Well,
Diane,
go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, the one thing I would add to that, just, you know, advice or coaching to individuals on those teams or in those companies is, you know, I think what Wendy's really getting at, especially if you're seeing the leader change over, you know, a couple of leaders in a short period of time. You know, I think there's a lot of other decisions that are going on, whether from shareholders or boards of directors or, you know, general managers. But independent of that, for the player or the employee, you know, that really gets to self-image, and oftentimes an employee or a player will derive some of their self-image from the leader. It makes perfect sense. It's sort of how we all interact. But, you know, it can't be stressed, you know, strongly enough that the self-image is really the key to the human personality and performance. And so if you change your self-image, you will change your personality and you will change your behavior. And, you know, people need to have the courage to do that. And, you know, truly, and it sounds corny, but the most important sale in your life is to yourself. And, you know, to change a habit, you need to make a conscious decision. You got to act on the new habit and so forth. But for those people that are joining a team that may have a history of not being successful, or joining a company that may have gone through some recent troubles, it's really important for those athletes, for those folks to think about their self-image in the context of the process and how they can be a positive force, you know, to you know, achieving the goal and helping the team win or the company win.
Well, I totally agree, and I think you guys have done some interesting work. And I'm curious, Wendy, about your work with the Navy SEALs. What did you do with them?
Well, that started when I was with the Olympics, and I wanted to connect with them, to take our players, our athletes through, I guess they called it the SEAL experience. And so, you know, when you think about mental toughness, obviously you think about Navy SEALs, when you think about military. And so I thought that'd be a really good aspect for us to be able to help develop that piece that they were, you know, kind of missing as they going through the process of trying to become Olympians. And so just in that time, as I was taking our players through there, I just got to know these guys really well, and they were wanting to develop a company. And so in that process, this is what we did. We started APG, which is, we just took the Navy SEALs, the way that they use, what they use in order to develop mental toughness. We use those aspects and just changed it into language that would fit businesses and sports world. Brought in sports psychology pieces, and, you know, marketed what we had as this is how you can develop quote unquote mental toughness. This is how you can develop quote unquote team cohesion and team dynamics. And so it started with working with athletes, trying to connect them, and then it evolved into this company.
Well, did you learn more mental toughness from them or from having twins? You have twins, right?
I do have twins. You know, one thing I did learn from them is that, it's funny, but it's so on point with what they try to stress, is that they talk about how people are really not, or should I say athletes are really not in pain. You know, they'll put athletes through something as in, you have to do these push-ups and you have to hold the position, and who's in pain, and, you know, of course everybody raises their hand and they're in pain, and they explain to them, actually you're not in pain, you're just in discomfort. You know, unless you've had a baby, you don't really know what pain is.
Yeah, I'm with you.
So they try to put it in perspective, you know, that you're just uncomfortable, and being uncomfortable is actually okay. So I think that's one of the things that I definitely learned from them, that I, you know, try to push, is that being uncomfortable is okay.
Right, right. So, Bob, are you going to sign up for the Navy SEAL program now?
Not anytime soon, but I certainly admire what they do.
Well, you guys do some really interesting work. Are you planning on publishing this anytime soon, or are you still in the research phase?
We're still in the research phase, but we publish every so often via our LinkedIn, and both Wendy and I are on LinkedIn, and you can find me at Bob Daugherty at Forbes School of Business and Technology on LinkedIn, and Wendy and I deliver some of our research as we start to publish it through that forum.
Well, that's awesome. Is it? I just want to make sure people know how to spell your last name. It's a little tricky. It's Daugherty, correct?
Yes, exactly. It's phonetically Daugherty, but we think we still live in Ireland.
Well, you guys, thank you so much for being on the show. This is really fascinating. I totally enjoyed our conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.